Hey, how's it going? Dr. Medic here. This month we have the abomination that is Pyro. If you're unaware, this series is where I take my underappreciated weapons video from last July and cut it up into segments for your enjoyment to make it a little more digestible. It is one weapon for each slot. And to make things a bit more interesting, especially for those who've seen the original video, this one will have one new segment, if not two, not for Pyro, sorry, but some other classes do get two, at the end, created specifically for this video so that even if you've seen the original video, there is something new here for you. That weapon can be for any slot I desire. Now that you're caught up, let's go. This primary isn't necessarily hated. In fact, it's loved by a small subgroup of people. However, I think the majority of players fail to realize the damage potential this thing actually has. You probably already know what weapon I'm going to talk about. The Dragon's Fury. One of the newest weapons added to TF2. Almost 7 years ago. Yeah, the last set of weapons were added in October of 2017. Before a lot of you were probably even playing this game, unless you're a veteran. It was between this and the Backburner, but I see the Backburner far more often than I do the Dragon's Fury, so I chose the Fireball Cannon. The Dragon's Fury is a single-shot burst flamethrower-like weapon. Rather than a stream of gas lit on fire, it fires a single fireball that can penetrate multiple enemies. It deals 25 base damage, however, if you manage to connect the middle of a fireball with a player after shooting them once, or finding someone who's already lit on fire, or maybe you used your flare gun for example, it will begin to fire quicker, about 50%, and deal 3 times the damage, so instead of 25, it will deal 75 damage. However, what I said is somewhat false, a little bit misleading. The stats on this thing are a bit misleading. The base damage is actually 75, which is why it does 75 damage to buildings. But while it states that it does more damage to burning enemies, it actually does less damage against non-burning enemies. So the damage is reduced against non-burning enemies, not raised versus burning enemies. Does that make sense? The only reason I said 25 base damage is because your first shot against non-burning enemies, which happens most of the time, is going to be 25. But against buildings or enemies who are on fire, it will be 75. Sorry about the confusion. I know, it's a little bit weird. The only listed downside on this weapon is that the compression blast is a little bit slower, which definitely hurts, but it also technically costs more to air blast. This thing holds 40 ammo because it doesn't use the traditional ammo system that the rest of the flamethrowers do. You can fire 40 of these flame ball things, but it costs 5 to air blast, and if you do the math, that only gives you 8 air blasts, similar to the degreaser, unlike the stock's 10. I think that it isn't so much that this weapon is disliked, but more just misunderstood, as people do not see the insane potential that this thing has. You can easily dispatch light classes in the blink of an eye if you can manage to connect your fireballs, and you can also hit a group of people with it. Well, of course you can do that with the flamethrower. People seem to forget that the Dragon's Fury fireball can pass through enemies and hit the rest of the crowd. It can 2-shot minis at level 1s, and it can 3-shot other buildings, making it the most reliable building destroyer out of all of Pyro's kit. Sure, the Homewrecker does kind of fill that role, at least it's supposed to, but the Dragon's Fury is just better as it could do it from a slight range. This thing does have a slower air blast compression speed, which does hurt, but don't be fooled, this thing can still air blast. Actually, all flamethrowers besides the Phlogistonator can, even the Backburner. I'm looking at you, Backburner Pyro, who took 3 rocks to the face while WM1ing that soldier on 5 CP Gorge. I was watching you, and you just kept running. Remember, Mouse 2, guys, it works on the Backburner. It's had the ability to air blast since, I believe, 2009-ish. So yeah, just so you know. Okay, but to wrap it up, the Dragon's Fury is definitely really good, it's just a bit misunderstood. It does very high damage, it can just absolutely decimate enemies if you can manage to hit your shots, and I recommend that you give it a try. You'll likely find more use out of it if you can actually aim. Now for the secondary. There are quite a few potential candidates for this spot. You have the shotguns as a whole, the detonator, but there is one weapon that is often considered bad when in all reality, it isn't. It's just a bit outshined by the other options. Some of you may want to boo me off the stage, but my pick for this is going to be a laser weapon. The Man-Melter 3600ZX. I know, but give me a minute to explain first what the Man-Melter actually does. The Man-Melter is a flare gun just like any other. It fires a projectile, does 30 damage on direct hit, and lights enemies on fire for a short duration. You get it. The benefits of this thing, however, is that the weapon has a 50% faster projectile speed, being the same speed as the Sandman Ball or the Wrapped Assassin Bauble, at 3,000 hammer units. the regular flare being 2,000 hammer units for reference. This weapon also has an alt attack, which allows you to use it on burning teammates to extinguish them for 20 health and storing a single crit similar to the Diamondback. I should be clear, you can store up to 35, but you get 1 crit for extinguishing. Sorry for the poor wording. This weapon has infinite ammo and doesn't have to reload at all. Technically, it has a short, buffer time, but there is no actual reload animation. This sounds awesome, however it does have downsides. Its downsides are actually not listed in the weapon stat for some reason, except for one, no random crits. However, they do exist. The other downside being that this weapon doesn't offer any sort of damage buff for hitting burning enemies like the other flare guns do. I guess you can kind of say that isn't really a downside, but compared to the other flare guns, it is. Okay, so now that I've explained this, why am I even defending the thing? Well, it's because the Man Melter, while it's not as reliable as the trusty flare gun or have as much utility as, say, the detonator, it isn't all that bad. That's where people go wrong. First of all, the projectile speed bonus is amazing. While some mouth-breathing knuckle draggers like to make fun of extra projectile speed by calling it a crutch, I don't care. You'll hit more shots, you'll hit them more effectively, more often, and from a longer range. It's a lot harder to dodge it at 3,000 hammer units compared to 2,000 hammer units. Imagine it like trying to dodge the Cleaver or the Wrapped Assassin Ornament. The Man Melter would also be the best long-range flare gun if it weren't for God's blind spot, the Scorch shit. Though it still does have the projectile speed that makes those shots a little bit easier to land. It also has no damage penalty, meaning it does 30 damage plus the extra 60 from Afterburn, assuming it's full Afterburn. Now, while it can't crit or mini-crit on demand like the other flare guns, it can store crit from extinguished enemies. So if you got a trigger-happy enemy pyro or a secondary shot-happy Count Mangler soldier, you'll be able to store a bunch of free crits. These crits travel super fast, are hard to dodge, and do 90 damage. That's not a little chunk of that's a big chunk of damage right there. If it weren't for the stupid visual bug, this thing would be insane. Though you do get flashbang literally every time you use it, except for sometimes. I'm not actually sure how that even works. There's a bug where you use the secondary fire, you hold it down, and it kind of has an animation where you steal the fire off your teammate, but for some reason when you use the primary fire and you have a crit, that animation goes up again, so it just completely blinds you. Yeah, I mean, it sucks. Also, you do not need ammo for this thing, which is nice, I guess. You can just keep spamming it, but it's not really that big of a deal. So, to wrap it up, the Man Melter may not be as versatile as the older brother flare gun, and not as pestering as the younger brother of the Scorch shot. It is still really good. Oh, and one last thing I thought was interesting. The flare gun was added back in 2008. It didn't have the crit nor mini crit against burning enemies, and it only did 20 damage on direct hit. Meaning, if the Man Melter was released 3 years prior alongside the flare gun, it would be a direct upgrade. No reason to know this, I just thought it was interesting to think about. But yeah, the Man Melter, it's pretty good. I definitely recommend that you give it a try. Sure, it isn't as reliable, like I said, as the other flare guns, but that doesn't mean it is bad. Now for melees. Pyro's melees only fall into 2 categories, Extinguisher and Utility. All the Pyro's melee weapons are properly rated in my opinion. Seriously, all of them. The only one that I can think is just a smidge underrated, just a teensy bit, is a personal favorite of mine, the Back Scratcher. The Back Scratcher is not a hated weapon, and it's not really super underrated at all, like none of Pyro's weapons really are. But I think it's because of the Power Jack's existence that most Pyros don't give this thing a fair shot. The Back Scratcher has 3 stats, very simple. It has a 25% damage bonus, which is nice, bringing up the base 65 to 81, but a damage bonus on Pyro's melee isn't all that impressive. However, it does have another upside that matters. It also comes with a 50% health from health packs on wear, which most importantly makes medium health packs go from 88 upon pickup to 132. The downside is a 75% less healing from healers, which includes medics, medibeam, and engineered dispensers. This weapon is really good, I mean really good. The 25% damage bonus is pretty cool. You can 2-shot medics, which can come in handy sometimes. I believe you can also 1-shot soldiers and even battalion backup soldiers, and leave full Demo Knights at just 1 HP, assuming they're running the booties and the Eyelander at full heads. But the 50% extra healing from health packs is the main draw of this weapon. That's where the weapon really shines. It's really nice if you're a lone wolf pyro, if you like to roam on your own. That extra health has saved me countless times where if I didn't have the extra health from health pickups, I would have been surely killed. It is super nice to have that bonus even if you're not in active combat. It's just nice to be able to top yourself off and get a lot more from medium and small health packs. The 75% less healing from healers is also not that bad and can actually even benefit you. It is similar to how Scout's Boston Basher can abuse the downside of hitting yourself to benefit your team's medic during downtime, helping them build Uber. If you aren't aware, as your heal target gets closer to full and goes into overheal, the rate in which you gain Uber charge is slowed. This is to kind of discourage pocketing and encourage switching up your heal targets in order to gain Uber charge at maximal speed. So taking the Medibeam out of your soldier boyfriend's ass and putting it onto the rest of your team like a good medic. Please, medic. Please. The 75% less healing from healers can also help medics keep a very high Uber charge rate while they're healing you, especially if you start low, because they'll be at lower health for longer. Plus, if you actually need health, a good medic will notice that you're gaining health very slowly and pull out his crossbow, since every medic and his mother is running the Crusaders. Because for some reason, the 75% less health from healer stat does not apply to the Crusaders' crossbow arrows, meaning the downside is pretty negligible most of the time, and can even be a benefit on occasion. The only time the downsides are detrimental is if the medic doesn't notice you're slowly gaining health in the middle of a firefight, which can definitely happen while everything's moving around as crazy, or if he doesn't have the Crusader's crossbow for some reason, which, I'm sorry, that's me sometimes. I like to run the syringe guns, give them a bit of love. It happens on occasion, but most of the time, medics have the Crusader's crossbow, so there's really no issue. The only real downside, I guess, is that, engineer dispensers, that's the only thing that's going to be a constant effect. Engineer dispensers are probably the only thing that come into play most of the time. So overall, the back scratcher is a pretty solid pick if you want to roam around a bit, and you just want to make sure that you have some extra survivability. I 100% recommend that you use the back scratcher. It is actually pretty good. I'm gonna be honest with you, Pyro's weapons were the most difficult for me in general, as not too many are just straight up underrated, or they're just not underrated enough to make a segment about them. I could talk about the shotguns on Pyro, but it'd be weird to say they're underrated. Maybe the reserve shooter, but I already did a segment on the reserve shooter for Soldier's video. Wouldn't make a lot of sense to do it again, since I also briefly talked about Pyro in that segment. This segment is going to be about an item that's slightly, hardly, just a teeny bit underrated. But I still want to talk about it. I'm going to talk about a weapon I see utilized extremely well by very few people who do use it, but not many people who use it, that's the problem. That weapon is the Thermal Thruster. The Thermal Thruster is a secondary for Pyro that was added to the game in the last major update on October 20th, 2017 as part of the Jungle Inferno update. This is one of the most unique Pyro secondaries of the bunch. When deployed, you can press M1, which will thrust you up for a short period, and then a bigger launch afterwards, which will shoot you in the direction that you're aiming in. This weapon has 2 charges, each taking 15 seconds to recharge. When landing near an enemy, you'll push them back very slightly depending on velocity, and if you land on top of them, you'll take no fall damage. Instead, the fall damage will be multiplied by 3 and dealt as damage to the person you landed on, similar to the man transfer soldier. You'll take slightly less fall damage and slightly more push force while you have the Thermal Thruster actually deployed. And finally, this weapon takes 60% longer to holster, taking 0.8 seconds rather than 0.5 seconds that most other weapons do. The Thermal Thruster, like I said, isn't underrated, but underutilized by the general population of gamers in Team Fortress 2. The Thermal Thruster, I will not lie, is not a mainstay for me either, but I can appreciate what it can do. It is great for making large leaps to platforms that the detonator just can't get you to with its small blast jumps. The Thermal Thruster can be good for sneaking behind enemies or even catching them off guard by thrusting yourself upwards and towards a small group of them. Since TF2 players don't look up, assuming they don't see you take off, you'll be fine and secure those kills pretty easily. The best weapon to pair with the Thermal Thruster for this type of playstyle is of course the Backburner, which is also somewhat underrated, but not enough to talk about making, a whole segment about it. Newsflash, people, you can still air blast with that weapon. Okay, back to the synergy between the Thermal Thruster and the Backburner. With the Backburner, this means that you can position yourself correctly, and you'll be able to incinerate people that you're sneaking up on, as it deals guaranteed critical hits from behind. The Thermal Thruster makes it easier and gives you far more paths to work with, whether that's simply going up and over them, or by using flank routes that would be hard to access or straight up inaccessible to the Pyro. This can be good as an aggression tool or a mobility tool. Just don't forget about its hidden 60% deploy speed penalty. It used to be even worse, it was actually 120%. Can you believe that? At least some seem to not realize, but it can also be good for throwing off your enemy as well. The thrust will launch you upwards, but you don't have to continue to look in the same direction. If you're in a fight and you need to do some tricky movement in order to win, you can do the initial thrust in whatever direction, and then right before you blast off, look in the other direction to launch yourself in that direction. This can be really effective for throwing off your opponent's aim. Sure, it can be risky if you're right next to your opponent, but if you're a decent distance away, but still not like enough to get away on foot, it can be a viable option. Basically, what I'm saying is that the thermal thruster is very versatile, and you can do a lot of different things with it. Is it the best weapon? No, but it is a bit underappreciated, and it is a lot better than some people give it credit for. That's all I really got for the thermal thruster. It's a decent item to run sometimes, and I recommend that you do run it from time to time, especially if you've been on the same loadout forever. It can be good to mix up your playstyle, and it's pretty effective. Just make sure to use it to its fullest. That's really it. That'll do. I will see you all in the future.